Can we have the apologies, please, Jacqueline?
Yeah, apologies from Councillor Stuart Ashley, Stuart Evans, Alan Furser, Maria Graham, Alan Jones, Phil Seaborn, Wayne Tomlinson, Graham Smith, Norma Parish, Fiona Cross, Neil Waite, Keith James, Giles Davis, Hugh Bevan and Barry Taylor.
Okay, thank you very much. We move on then to item 2, declarations of interest. Can I refer now to Linda Willis, our legal officer?
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any declarable interests in today's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move on then to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of November. You have the minutes in front of you there, pages 5 to 18. I intend to move them all in a block. Are you happy with that? Thank you very much. Sorry. The next item, item 4, the action sheets. I think all the actions have been completed there. We are waiting for one outstanding action.
I'm just wondering, I don't know whether it's me misunderstanding, but are we quorate on Councillor Just, are we?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Sorry, we do have one outstanding item on the action sheet that we're waiting for. Helen, have you got any details of that?
We're waiting for a response on recommendations sent as a result of the lessons learned from complaints overview and scrutiny. We're continuing to chase that for you.
If we move on then to agenda item 5, Safeguarding Children and Young People, the Wales Audit Office report. And we have an invitee this afternoon, Jeanette Beale from Grant Thornton, who is going to take us through the work that she's done on behalf of the Audit Committee. So she is here, we're just waiting for her to... Just like to sit on the end there. Can we welcome you to the meeting? Jeanette, would you be good enough to take us through your report? Just a 5-minute brief. Thank you.
Sorry, struggling with the technology there. Thank you very much. I'll just briefly take you through the report then. The work was developed by the Wales Audit Office and has been completed across all the councils within Wales, so this just is one of many reviews that's been undertaken. The work was completed in March, the field work in March last year. The study examined what the council itself has done to seek assurance around its arrangements to support safeguarding and ensuring that effective by reviewing how the council is discharging its safeguarding responsibilities at all levels. That includes cabinet, senior management, scrutiny and individual officers. It focused on 3 key questions, those being are there clear governance, accountable and management arrangements for overseeing whether the council is meeting its safeguarding responsibilities to children, Is the Council monitoring and evaluating appropriate information which provides assurance that it is meeting its safeguarding responsibilities to children? And finally, are assurance systems operating effectively? I think overall, and coming up with the conclusions that we made and the recommendations, we did find that there were some significant weaknesses that the Council must address, and in particular within the governance arrangements we identified there were some weaknesses which the Council must address, and also within monitoring and evaluation there are some weaknesses that the Council must address. And also then moving on to identifying and acting on improvements, some weaknesses which the Council is addressing. We made 6 proposals for improvement, of which I think there are some quite significant requirements here that need to be addressed. First of all, ensuring that there's a cohesive and consistent approach to safeguarding across the Council, covering all areas across the Council, not only social services and education, but also other areas such as leisure that come into contact with children. We identified that a corporate safeguarding policy is required, and again that quite clearly links into the first requirement. You know, if you've got a policy in place, that sets out how you will pull all those things together and how you will be acting as a council. The third is about ensuring that there's timely action taken to address significant risks and underperformance. Fourthly, about safe recruitment and ensuring that policies, again, it links back into one. You know, you've got some key changes that have been brought in, and ensuring that a result of those changes, your policies are up to date, you've got a safe recruitment policy in place, that staff and volunteers across the council know what they should be following and how they should be following it. The fifth one was around elected members' staff who come into contact with children on a regular basis, receive training on safeguarding and child protection issues. Again, these all link in together. As you review and update your policies, then you will be ensuring that your training is up to date and covers that. And lastly is how you might involve internal audit. And that's my summary at this point, if that's okay.
Are you happy to take some questions on your report?
Yes, quite happy for questions or further detail if you require it.
Okay. Can I start off? How do safeguarding arrangements in Torfaen compare with other local authorities?
I think what you need to be aware of is that there's a national report coming out from the Wales Audit Office that I'm being told that it will be coming out in the spring, and that will enable you to more fully compare. I can only, I guess from an individual perspective, comment on the 3 that I looked at that we're auditors for, and I think it's fair to say you do have some significant improvements that you do need to make.
Any other questions? Can I ask you then, are the proposed actions in the report sufficient to address the proposals for improvement, in your view?
I think, in my view, they do give some way to address it. If I was to, I guess, to make any comments, my view would be going back to the timeliness, to think on the basis that these are quite significant requirements that need, whether a target date of June is early enough, and whether you could progress that to have things in place. I know that a lot of them link, so it's almost, I mean, a lot of them go hand in hand, but whether, sorry, I've now turned to, I'm looking at the action points in place, whether, you know, so look at June 2015, you know, whether you could pull that forward and look at some of those things in place much earlier. And I guess, I think it does, I do like the idea of bringing a sort of a cross-council group in place. Sorry, I'm now trying to remember the name of the group, but and to look around introducing performance indicators. Now, I guess my challenge and question and to that would be, it's all very good having process performance indicators. You need to try and look to how you have outcomes, to focus on the outcomes in there. And on that, let me just check if I've made... Again, I'm going back to the timing. That sorry, putting that in front of the microphone. I was thinking a lot of things. I think, you know, if you're going for the date in June, then I think some things could be, you know, if you can bring it forward to June, then a lot of things, whatever date, if you can bring it forward, would be happening simultaneously. Because obviously, as you develop your policy, you need to build in, you know, the safe recruitment policy. It becomes a part of your corporate policy, and then your training and your awareness rolls out on the back of that. And again, the only thing I would say about the timeliness is and the ability to address the risks. I mean, we highlighted in our original report that safeguarding has been a significant risk on your risk registers since 2010-11. I mean, I guess as for yourselves, the priority is how do you get that not to a significant risk.
Ron, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Your comments just now triggered something that struck me when I read the plan. It's all activity-based. There's no targeted specific outcome at any point. And I would normally expect to see that in the plan. And your point about timeliness, I mean, you mentioned June, but when you look at it, the training goes right up until December. And in effect, it's not effective until people are trained. So we could be looking at a scenario where none of it's really working until December. I'd appreciate your comments on that. And one last thing on that. My context is schools. I'm a school governor. It just so happens that this very evening we are adopting our schools safeguarding policy and plan. Are you confident that all of the aspects, cross-council, education and so on, will actually be coherent with one another in terms of the way the plan's been put forward?
So I'll take the latter first. I don't think I can be at this point, because I can't, at the moment I'm saying that things, from the point at the time when this review was completed, I was saying that things weren't coherent. What you're proposing here is, as you say, is a number of actions that ensure that it will be, and to bring it in place. But I guess what you're saying about education and developing their policy, I mean, this is what the corporate policy has to do, is has to pull all those individual, you know, policies and things together and present that consistent approach so everybody knows what you're trying to do and how you're doing it and what the policies are in place. And I guess I'm going to refer now to the staff handbook, that's woefully out of date. Sorry, your emotive language there, but I think we said two things. If there are documents like that, and I think the action plan, it talks about what you're going to do with it. There's two things: either you pull it because if it's referring to things that are out of date when other policies have been introduced, you're just leaving staff with a situation where they could be following things that are incorrect. So things like that are all, it's things like that to absolutely that overview to ensure that you are clear about what you're trying to do. Sorry, can you remind me what the first question was you asked me?
The first one was a question of activities versus outcomes. And the second one was timeliness and training in December.
Yeah, and I think there is something about, how you translate this into outcomes, and I think that maybe comes out through the performance indicators, ensuring that you put into place the performance indicators are, effective outcomes, and monitoring against that.
Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Chair. If I can combine the first question with the second, and taking an extract from the report, as a key partner of the South Wales Safeguarding Children's Board, what support has been asked for or given to help the council list their 6 highlighted areas for improvement? In other words, who did you turn to for help, if you like? Or did you do all the research and the findings within the council services themselves?
Sorry, I'm not sure. In respect of who did I use within the council to help me pull together these findings?
And external as well.
Externally, we actually through my colleagues at the Wales Audit Office, so they didn't meet. The chair of the Safeguarding Board was interviewed. Otherwise, it was members. Sorry, yes, it was members, as in political, as well as employees of the council that I spoke to complete this review.
So, did you turn to the South East Wales Safeguarding Children's Board as a whole, or just the chairperson?
It was the chairperson that was interviewed, but we did use documentation, supporting documentation that they prepared to support our findings.
Can I just ask, do you have, how will the Wales Audit Office monitor progress and effectiveness of us going forward?
My understanding, it will fall to the local audit team to follow up in the following year.
Are there any other questions for Jeanette at the moment? Councillor Morby?
Can I ask if, in your experience, other authorities have more than one executive member responsible for safeguarding?
I am unable to comment of all authority to give you a view of all authorities across the Wales, because I don't have that information. I'm hoping that might come out in the national report. There are examples of, there are definitely others that have more than one, but I think my view is that if you only have one member responsible, then you're quite clear of, and there's not a lack of confusion.
Sorry, Chair, just about audit. It may be my misunderstanding, but I'm not sure I understand the audit process, because the Wales Audit Office will take an interest in the authorities' safeguarding policies. Estin takes a view about safeguarding when it does reviews of schools. How will it go through the organisation, in a sense, out to the parts? Will Wales Audit Office look directly at schools, or will they expect the authorities' audit department to have looked at the schools, or exactly how? I'm not sure.
I think what this review, again, sets out to do is look at your assurance processes. We're not actually, so we haven't, in that sense, we haven't gone out and tested in each individual school the safeguarding procedures in place. We're looking at how you assure yourselves that those procedures are in place. So in that respect, no, we are not going out and auditing individual schools. Hence, I guess the last recommendation sort of illustrates it. Hence, we would look at how you yourselves might gain that assurance through internal audit.
Through our programme of auditing schools, we do carry out checks on the disclosure and barring service to make sure teachers and volunteers, etc., have the relevant checks to do that, and that will continue. I think in the action plan I've also stressed that once the new policy is embedded, we will carry out a review post the embedding of that policy to make sure that it's operating as we expect. So I think it will fall to internal processes within the council and to make sure we monitor what we put in place.
Does that add to your function when you're auditing a particular school, as well as ensuring that the employees are properly checked, that the school's policy is actually consistent with the council's?
We do I don't know the specific detail of the TEP. I know we check they have a safeguarding policy, and we've already checked there's certain things within it in order for a sort of a benchmark of things. So I think we check that as part of the school's audit programme. But the development of a corporate policy may add to that process. We might identify things that could be added to it, etc. You know what I mean, in terms of learning going forward. So we'd probably look at both areas.
If there aren't any more questions, can I thank Jeanette for coming along this afternoon? Thank you very much. Okay, members, I think we intended to go through the proposals one by one. And can I call on Councillor Mary Barnett to take proposal 1, please?
Right, thank you, Madam Chair. How do the actions in this section ensure a consistent approach to safeguarding, and have staff who regularly come into contact with children been engaged in the formulation of this action plan? The proposal, of course, was about the cohesive and consistent approach to safeguarding across the council.
Can I ask, Mary, is there any particular officer you're asking that question, or is it just to Ruth?
No, I would like to have the views of everyone on the front table with a responsibility for, ensuring a consistent approach.
I'll start then, as I sort of pulled it together. Key to the sort of future development is the corporate safeguarding leads group. And until we meet as a group and, if you like, take that first step to cohesion in how we sort of roll safeguarding forward, we're not going to be able to sort of say here and now, well, this is where, where we're at and this is where we're going. And I think that, it's a significant, potential improvement. It's going to improve things, because if we get together in a group from a single sort of safeguarding policy, that has got to make things better, because everybody will understand everyone's perspective and we'll be able to put more substance around the action plan.
So, a writer to that then, could you identify for us who are the identified leads in that corporate safeguarding leads group?
Name them, you mean? I think it's everybody here.
I can name them, Councillor Barnett.
He's got a list.
I've got a list. So from education, we've got Darren. From communities, we've got Barbara Howe. From social and care and housing, we've got Ruth. From resources, we've got Dereth Harries. From neighbourhoods, we've got Kim Pugh. From the PSSU, we've got Lyndon Puddy. From the SSU, we've got Ed, as and when he's required, because they don't actually have a lot of contact with children and young people. And from the SRS, we've got Kath Barnard. And I will chair that group as the Deputy Chief Officer in Social Care.
Could I comment, Chair? I'm quite sort of pleased at the seniority of the staff who are taking on those lead roles and their spheres of influence and extra contacts as well.
Can I just make one further comment there, Councillor Barnett? We've also got the safeguarding lead for the authority, Deb Davis, who will be in attendance. But the lead for this, the request for the nominations went out from the Chief Executive. So, if you like, I will be reporting directly to the Chief Executive on this. So we've taken the audit very, very serious, and that is why we went to the Chief Exec, and the letters or the request for nominations from people of a certain level of seniority, that was the request.
I had a few more comments then, Chair. Do you think the timing is right now so that we can proceed at the pace we need to, really, particularly with development of the performance indicators, etc.?
I think, in truth, when we met to put this together, we were being slightly cautious in terms of putting times in that were very, very tight, given the massive agenda we've got on other things, and I'm sure members are aware of sort of the other pressures we've got at the moment dealing with the financial issues, etc. But in terms of some of the other things, some of the bits of work are well underway and will come to fruition before that. So some of the timescales may be able to come forward. For example, the corporate policy is well underway in draft. I have it with me. It's nearly completed. I've been working on it with a colleague. We've had some input from others, but the first meeting of the Leeds group will be to consider what we've got and to look at some of the performance indicators we're suggesting, because I fully accept the members' view that it's all activity, but if we get some other PIs that are a bit more tangible, we will be able to, to put some more flesh on the bones. But, to be fair, I think we've made reasonable progress with that. I mean, we started it in January and it's nearly done.
And have frontline staff, now I've commented on how reassuring it is to see the involvement of the most senior figures we've got, but have frontline staff who regularly come into contact with children been involved in the formulation of the action plan?
No, they haven't been involved in the formulation of the action plan. People are aware of it, but they haven't been involved with the formulation. I think it will roll out, because the idea is that the leads for each service area will take it back into their own service area. That's the intention, that they will take it back and seek views, and, that's where the detail around the training of staff right down to the front line will take place. In some service areas, obviously, there's lots of training takes place, regularly anyway, social care, education, youth and leisure, but, it does need rolling out. But the idea is that the corporate leads will act as the conduit for that work.
Sean, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just concerned that obviously that essentially what it sounds like, the implication is that the formatting of everything that's being done is being done by heads of department rather than the people that are at the front line. Having seen over the years, obviously that isn't always the best thing ever, because quite often, obviously, people who are on the senior management, it's been a long time since they've been on the front line, and things do evolve and change. And I think it would be more prudent to, before you actually put anything hard down on paper, to then roll it out, and then rather than having a policy which doesn't work.
I can make a comment there. The policy is a corporate policy. It's very much about sort of leadership, governance and sort of strategic direction. On a day-to-day basis, we follow more sort of functional policy working that is very much integrated for all of those staff that are in direct contact with children and young people and vulnerable adults in the future. So it's a slightly different sort of thing. The policy that where we were lacking, the policy area that we were lacking in was in that cohesion, was in having a central sort of government point at which safeguarding could sort of roll out, if you like. So it is a slightly sort of different thing. What this will create now is to have that sort of whole council governance, which we were lacking in that. And I'm really pleased that we will have a policy, but the policy that we've got will be something that can be sort of promoted so that everyone understands the governance arrangements. But in terms of day-to-day policy around safeguarding, vulnerable children, young people, those policies are in place. The Welsh Audit Office was looking at something wider than that.
Thank you.
Councillor Barnett. Sorry.
Yes, could I ask specifically now, under 1.4 in Proposal 1, produce a quarterly standing report to the executive members? Will that take the form of a cabinet report, so it will be more in the public domain and available for challenge or further questions at council meetings by members, or will that be across the desk report to executive members?
It probably would be both, but we definitely saw it as a formal sort of reporting process, yes. A report to Cabinet.
The opportunity, obviously, for overview and scrutiny and backbenchers, if you like, to have a view of this and be able to then express their own opinions and comments?
I would hope so, yes. Yes. That would be the intention.
Councillor Morby.
Yeah, can I also ask in relation to 1.4, but equally referring to point 2, I think it is. The question I asked of the auditor was in relation to who has political responsibility for safeguarding. And I think at the moment the action plan is a little bit unclear, shall we say, because it refers to executive members in one part and the executive member responsible in another part. So one's in the plural and one's not. My understanding is that, apart from the fact that we're all responsible for safeguarding in some shape or form, that the lead politician was normally the executive member for social care, but that because education is our largest service in respect of children, that the executive member for education, and I think actually called executive member for children and young people, has a responsibility as well. And the reason I asked the question of the auditor was, is that good practice? Is that common practice? I'm ambivalent, having been both cabinet members for social care and children and young people in my time. So I'm not trying to advise, but I would like to have an officer viewpoint of at what point and at what point you need to address politicians in respect of your work in relation to safeguarding to get a steer. Is that an executive member or more than one executive member, or is it the cabinet? What do you feel would give the best fit for trying to ensure that you get a clear direction from members about how to implement the policy which presumably cabinet will have approved?
My view would be to stick with the guidance under the Children Act, which would be the executive member for social care and housing. And I think we need that one clear line of accountability. But that doesn't mean that other executive members are not involved, because you're right, Councillor Morby. This ultimately will become council policy. The intention is to take it to full council once we've fully developed it. So it'll go to Cabinet and then on to full council. That was the conversation I had with the Chief Executive.
May I suggest then that, subject to what Cabinet might make of that proposal, that report to Cabinet actually make it clear that your recommendation is along those lines, and that the action plan, in terms of whether it's executive members in the plural or singular, be reviewed to make sure that is crystal clear. Thanks.
Yes, we'll do that, Councillor Morby.
Councillor Crick.
Following on from what Councillor Morby just said, and he mentioned the word review, will it be quite clear, because it's almost implicit, but doesn't appear to be spelt out in the report or the proposals, that there will be regular review of the policies? We just had comment made about the 2007 handbook, and that will come up later as well. But it does seem as if we hadn't had that review of policies taking place built into them.
In terms of the review of this policy, I think we build that into the work programme of the leads that are sitting around the table. That was our intention or our sense of direction. That's what we would do. But yes, in terms of the policies, they should have been reviewed through the local safeguarding board. Some of them have been, but some of them it hasn't been noted that they were updated. We regularly get update policy from the safeguarding board, certainly for social care and education. So, I think that some of that, I'm not suggesting that the auditor was trying to mislead, but I think we would take issue with some of those points. I'd have to say as well, that our regulators who come in regularly, they have not drawn that conclusion. I mean, I think they were here in front of council not long ago, and that is not the position they were finding in Torvine.
Any other questions? Okay. Would you be happy then to move on to proposal 2? And I think Ray Mills is going to take us through this. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Chair. This question is for Keith. Keith, can you tell me how will the Corporate Safeguarding Lead Group ensure safeguarding is managed in organisations that are subject to a service level agreement? For example, the Active Living Centre, the Cumbrian Leisure Centre.
Under the old Safeguarding Board arrangements, we did something called a Section 28 review. And thinking about it, as I've been writing this up, I think we need to develop a similar tool that can be used across the piece, so that we can write out to organisations and they will essentially do a return, confirming what positions, what they've got them in place. Bruce just saying that we've already got this. Yeah.
We are literally poised to do that, and it's on the agenda for the next local learning review group, where we'll discuss with the multi-agency sort of people that are involved in safeguarding on a local level as to the next step. We used to call it the Section 28 audit. I mean, it'll still be called that, but we've revised it now in line of the new safeguarding arrangements. So that is happening.
If I can come back there. Can you tell me how will you share that information across all agencies?
Through the local learning review group, which is a subgroup of the South East Wales Safeguarding Children Board, but also now through the Leeds group as well, which will be a sort of further sort of route for things to be disseminated.
Casa Rees.
Is that going to be rolled out in school transport as well, Darren?
Yeah, it would be something that we would look to incorporate in any guidance around school transport. But I'm thinking also in terms of school usage by other agencies under the lettings policy and arrangements that schools would have for allowing others to use their sites would be part of that too, yeah.
I wonder whether, Kim, do you have any comments on these proposals?
Well, a lot of the school transport arrangements that are privately run by taxi companies are all covered by DBS checks and as part of having a taxi licence. And we work very closely with education now to make sure that there are no concerns about those drivers, that those concerns are addressed promptly. And I think with both Darren and myself on the Leeds group, that will only strengthen those relationships.
Can I bring Alan Williams and then Nigel afterwards?
Thank you, Chair. I need to declare an interest as Chairman of Torvine Leisure Trust. Can those who are sat at the front assure me, A, that our policies that we currently have as we follow Torvine's policies, we have an agreement for the next 2 years now, it was a 3-year agreement, we follow those policies and we follow those practices. Can you assure me, A, that there is no gap in those policies, and B, what will communication be in the future in relation to changes or in relation to the institution of that policy?
I'm sorry, at the moment I can't assure you that everything is in place, because I've literally come to this today not knowing all the background of the Leisure Trust and what's happened. But I am assured that the Leisure Trust follow the same as the Council, and that they have a safeguarding policy which has been agreed with social care as meeting the standards. And obviously that will be reviewed as this gets taken forward, the same as our own internal policies will be reviewed. The people are very well aware of what their responsibilities are, and I'm sure that they will be involved in the leads for the group to take things forward.
Councillor Davis. Oh, sorry, Alan.
Just in terms of education as well, we've recently, back in November, updated the guidance that's available to schools around their safeguarding policy and child protection policy. And a new document has just come out only 2 weeks ago, Keeping Learners Safe, from the Welsh Government. So we'll be carrying out a further review of the content of safeguarding policies in schools and providing further advice and guidance for that as part of developing the corporate policy. So head teachers would be involved throughout that and would help us develop that revised guidance around having their own individual policies up to date in schools.
Councillor Davis, sorry.
Yes. As in all probability, more and more council services are put out to tender or to or devolve to other local organisations and so forth, what steps will be made to make sure that they are aware of their responsibilities, and also about about policies with regard to this council and also national legislation on these matters?
Well, generally speaking, it would be part of contract compliance. So if we've got a contract, with an external provider, the sort of their policies, their safeguarding policies and their practices, their employment, we're very interested in that, and they have to demonstrate, how they are going to execute their responsibilities.
Councillor Davies.
So just on that, if in the council's opinion, an organisation wishes to take over a facility, and they look at their policies and how they are and how they're being operated, and they decide that and the council decides it's not good enough, is that a deal breaker?
I think it could possibly be, in the sense that we would try and support people. We would try and help them learn what they might need to do. But if they didn't take that advice and, move with what they needed to be doing, then we obviously wouldn't really be able to do business with them.
Can I bring Keith in and then Councillor Mills?
I think the theme of safeguarding has got to be that it's everybody's responsibility. And I think, as times have gone on and more of what were former council functions are externalised, we can hold them to account, but we've also got to emphasise that it's the people running those organisations that must be accountable. So the councillor's question around the Leisure Trust, I would have every confidence in Sally Church, knowing her business. I've worked with Sally for a number of years. She's very good on safeguarding and child protection. But as things move forward and those relationships are not as strong as they once were, we need to be very clear that if we're putting work out, that it's their responsibility, because they won't be the people in the council to spoon feed it any longer. And, obviously, in terms of contracts, we can hold them to what they've been contracted for and the compliance. But, a big part of this has got to be that people take responsibility if we are taking the decision to put services out, in the same way that officers of the council are.
Councillor Mills, did you wish to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. Keith, can you tell me, how well does the action plan prepare the council for the forthcoming legislation, such as the social care bill?
Insofar as we know that what's coming in the detail, I think, and Ruth and I discussed this when we sat down to put it, we think it's in the right direction. But to be quite honest, Councillor, the legislation is still very thin on detail, and we are awaiting an awful lot of further sort of statutory instrument, etc., from Welsh Government. But I think it's certainly, we think, fit for purpose and in the right direction.
Are there any other questions on proposal 2, members? Ron?
Just a quickie, it was your previous comment about responsibility and accountability. I mean, it seems to me that we ought to be giving some consideration that although we have a contractual accountability, there is also a statutory responsibility that a contract doesn't absolve us from. And that therefore, if we were contracting, we'd probably have to put our rules in place that would say adequate safeguarding provisions, not only a policy but evidence that it is an operational policy, would become one of the mandatories for any contract.
And I think we do that in Ruth's comment around the contract compliance. We do check that those things are in place. But it's got to be, I suppose, the day-to-day responsibility's got to be the people running those organisations. We can't run them from here.
Sorry.
Thank you. Obviously, relevant to the comments that have just been made about the fact that we have contract compliance. How frequently are we monitoring that? How frequent are we actually going into those companies to confirm that those policies are working and not just a piece of paper, but actually being actioned on?
Can I ask, would that be something that internal audit would do? Or is that up to the individual department?
It is. I think it's more to do with the compliance checks that are carried out within social care than internal audit. But you know, we could perform a role if it was required.
We would. We're looking at quarterly sort of general monitoring, but if we have got indicators that we may need to look at something, then we can do that more frequently. And depending on the type of contract, how much it's worth, what the sort of risk factors are, would depend on how sort of much hands-on monitoring we were doing. But it can be incredibly heavy monitoring, and certainly if there were any concerns, then it would be it's a very practical task. You work alongside the provider. You want people to be able to meet the terms of the contract, but they can you can only give them so much, as Keith has said. At some point you've got to say either sort it out or we'll have to review this arrangement.
Bring Keith in and then Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, thinking of safeguarding in a broader sense in terms of not just children, for example, where we've had concerns in home care or in residential and nursing care, in residential and nursing care, we would send staff in and do an unannounced visit. We'd just arrive early in the morning and, ask for access and see if what people have said. And that does happen. We've got staff who, get up outside of their normal duties and go and see what's going on. We had a concern raised by one of your colleagues around a home care organisation. We've had them in. We've had the conversations around some of the concerns that were being raised about the amount of time they were spending with service users, what they were doing when they went in. So those things, they happen routinely, and perhaps we're not good at saying that because that's our business and we do it. But that does happen, regularly. I went straight back, spoke to the manager of the commissioning team and said, the concern's been raised about this organisation. She said, I'll get them in. They were in within 48 hours.
Thank you. Well, really, what I was going to ask is what you've just covered. What I'm concerned about is it is about safeguarding everybody. What kind of spot checks do you do to actually go in and see that the people working, it's not CRB check now, but you know what I mean, that they are absolutely compliant with what is necessary?
There obviously is a role for the local authority, but there's also a role for the regulators and, the Care Standards Inspectorate as well. So, and we work closely with them. Of course, if we have a concern, we would raise it. We would tell them we have a concern. So, yeah, I think we do cover it from more than one base.
Okay. Sorry.
If I could just add to that as well, quite a lot of environmental health staff are actually in and out of care homes in particular. And if we have any concerns, they're immediately passed up so they can be taken forward by social services.
Can I just say thanks, Kim, because I think it's that sort of thing that needs doing. They don't necessarily think that those people are checking up on everything, but it pays that it is a member of staff going in and they can keep an eye out for us.
Councillor Barnett.
Yes, it's linked to that, but it's a question for Darren Joseph. What kind of monitoring do we have of safeguarding within homes for cases of home tuition, either before we grant permission for the home tuition to take place and during that form of education?
That's something I'm not that sure of, actually. I'm going to have to check on that and come back to the committee, but so I'd rather not assume the checks that are in place, so I'll have to confirm that with the committee.
If I could ask Keith then, I assume that if, for example, a parent has a less than desirable record when it comes to protecting children, education would be informed about that if that parent should apply for home tuition?
It would be the usual lateral checks. Sorry, that are done. Yes, they would, question it. We have formally, I'm thinking of an ex-colleague, Terry Rolfe, and I having regular discussions around that when requests for home tuition were made. Now, whether that's happening now, I'd have to say we probably have to check that, because it's not something I deal with on a day-to-day basis. But we certainly do, because as you'll be aware, and probably where your question emanates from. There's been some quite scary issues in the past where children weren't in school and, you know, were supposedly home educated and, you know, they weren't being very well cared for.
Okay. Are there any other questions on proposal 2 in the action plan? If not, we move on then to proposal. Sir Davis.
We haven't yet dealt with 2.3, which I think, and that one, which I'm a bit concerned about the establishment of the safeguarding panel, and who would you consider to be the representatives of the service target population?
(2.3) representatives of the service target population.
I don't want to sort of say anything that we haven't fully discussed, because this is one of the things that we need to talk about as a Leeds group, as to who we feel would be the sort of right level of people, because it's about wanting to engage the wider sort of community and sort of continue to awareness raise about safeguarding responsibilities, but equally it needs to be with people that have got some understanding and some role in sort of influencing the wider. So that'll be something that I would say we'll be reporting on once we've fully discussed it. You know, rather than me just say, well, who would I think? I mean, you know, Darren, think, you know, possibly head teachers would be part of that. You know, it would be a sort of a diverse range of people, but I can't really speculate now until we've sort of fully discussed it.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, I was thinking in the last couple of exchanges, it's a slightly off-the-wall question, really. It's a fairly new environment. You know, the safeguarding thing is so far up the agenda now and so complex. Is there any implication for the authority, particularly social services, I suppose, in relation not to home tuition, which is quite a definite activity, but the extent to which people offer additional tuition, which is pretty actively done in the borough, and the risk factor of those individuals who choose to offer it? Well, it's just an off-the-wall question. I don't think it's an activity of the authorities, but where will it maybe pick up responsibilities?
I think it is a good point, because it's sort of ultimately the parent's responsibility, or the person with parental responsibility, to ensure that whoever is sort of caring, teaching, or taking having some sort of interaction with their child, you know, that they've got an awareness of if that person safe. And of course you can never know, but I think that's the importance of that sort of wider scale safeguarding awareness raising, so that the general public are aware, something that they may not have thought of, because they just make the assumption, oh well, there is someone advertising extra maths tuition, I'll put my son or daughter along with them, not really thinking about the sort of safeguarding elements. I can just show you this hot off the press. This is a DVD that will be uploaded to YouTube when it's signed off by the South East Wales Safeguarding Children Board at the next meeting. It's basically a sort of an animation of awareness raising called "Break the Suffering, Break the Silence." The idea is to sort of just raise general awareness about safeguarding, you know, across the piece really. I mean, it's fairly sort of user friendly. It's 12 minutes long. And when it does actually get uploaded, I will sort of send members, you know, a link to it so that everybody can see it. But I happen to sort of snatch a copy and say, could I just take that so that I can show our members in Torfaen that, you know, it's another step. It's that wider sort of, you know, using social media, just generally for the sort of awareness raising. And I think for that, you know, parents then may think about something that they previously wouldn't have thought about.
Back to the slogan that I think Welsh Government had some while ago, safeguarding is everyone's business. So I think if we keep that in mind. Okay, are there any other questions on proposal 2? If not, we'll move on then to proposal 3. And I think Councillor Davies is going to take us through this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. What's the process for managing and resolving delays in implementation or underperformance?
I'm not sure I quite follow the question, Councillor.
well, based on Proposal 3, which is ensure appropriate and timely action is taken to address significant risks and underperformance. So what is the process for doing that?
I think when we discussed this one, we felt that if anything comes up as an immediate safeguarding issue, it should be dealt with immediately. So that would be the sort of view, I think, of the corporate leads, and that's what we would be pushing down through the organisation. So underperformance, I think, yes, looking at the performance indicators where it looks that they're not meeting the target that we would maybe set for ourselves, that would be addressed again within that group and taken back to the service area where it emanates from. So we've got lots of performance indicators across social care and again in education, I think. But one of the challenges for us is to develop a suite of indicators that covers all areas of the council. Because some people have very light touch in their contact with children and young people and vulnerable adults, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at what does happen. Obviously, some of the ones we looked at around DBS checks and the sort of timeliness of those and the renewals of those. So there's, lots of those bits that we're going to have to build in. So I think, what we're saying is timeliness of action, if there's a significant risk, it should be immediate, in terms of there's a safeguarding issue, whether it's for a child or a vulnerable adult, and there are processes in place to do that through the child protection system and through the POVA, the protection of vulnerable adults. And I think, whilst I would never say nothing could go wrong, I think we've got a good record in Torvine for dealing with that.
Could I just add something there, Chair? The other thing is that what this will do, what this action plan and the group, the Leeds group will do, is to get some transparency around that and help us all as a sort of collective and as a council to look at, okay, what were the sort of actions coming in and how quickly were they dealt with? At the moment, as Keith said, we like to think, yes, we deal with things. We wouldn't just leave a sort of risky situation. We follow due process. But nobody really knows about that on a day-to-day basis. Why would they really? But I think with this, and when we've got some performance indicators that we can all sort of look at, monitor, it'll give us that sort of a window on some of the activity that goes on, behind the scenes.
Could you then explain to us what Section 3.3 means to the Council?
I suppose really that is a sort of a development. If something comes to one of the service areas, to make sure that the leads are sort of made aware of what's happening within perhaps their service area. Again, having that collective, that corporate safeguarding lead group, will have a group of people that hopefully will have shared sort of goals, objectives and understanding and process of what needs to happen.
Yes, going on a bit from that, with this 3.3, which, as you've already wrote about the corporate safeguarding leads group, is it, among the ideas is hopefully the spreading of good practice right across all the departments. That is good practice in one section, and which can then be transferred to other parts, which are in this are in different parts of the council, but which are dealing with young people and with vulnerable individuals too.
So I'd say exactly that, really, because we're all at different places. We're coming at it from different places. Some service areas are dealing with things on a day-to-day basis, and others aren't. So everybody needs the opportunity to sort of have a sort of level playing field, if you like, at the same level of understanding and of prioritising. And I feel this group will allow us to get there. We should have had one of these, really. And unfortunately, we didn't have one, but the Welsh Audit Office have reminded us that, yes, you need to have that sort of corporate leadership group. So it's a good thing.
Councillor Morby and then Councillor Kemp, sorry.
Can I just ask, though, in relation to 3.3 in particular, leads are mentioned under the heading activity to be undertaken, and the team person delivering this activity again mentions leads. Presumably they're the same people. And what I'm saying is you're talking to yourselves, really. And what I want to know is who is going to identify the leads of concerns. Is that a mutual thing, or is there someone else who's going to take that responsibility? Is it Ruth, for example? It's not clear.
It could be anybody, in essence, because it couldn't be that, only I could alert everybody. It would have to be sort of that everybody has a responsibility when they're aware of something. Fundamentally, on a day-to-day basis, the safeguarding manager is the person through which pretty much everything flows. So she would be the sort of conduit, the safeguarding manager. She's the manager of the safeguarding unit that is, based in social care, obviously. But we are looking to sort of more joined up working with other service areas as we move forward. And I think this will help that.
I'm sure it will, but it would be helpful if in the action plan that were actually articulated, that it will be the safeguarding manager who coordinates and ensures that concerns are transmitted to appropriate parties.
Keith, did you wish to comment on that before I bring Councillor Kemp in? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you. Under performance or performance, and we were talking about the KPIs as such. How were the KPIs decided upon, and do they mesh into the bigger picture, i.e. either the regional KPIs or the national KPIs, or are we just producing the data for the sake of producing data?
Well, to date, we've got a number of KPIs that we've pulled from the national ones that we submit. But I think it's what I said earlier. What we really feel we need to do is to develop some internal KPIs so that we know what's happening. So that, if you like, that we can evidence that the communication is taking place across the leads and across departments, that the training is going down to the front line, and that we can evidence that is happening. So, if you like, that we know how many frontline staff, not just in social care and housing or education, but in any service, that have received level 1 POVA or child protection training. Now, that's a big ask of the training team, but again, we're looking at other ways of delivering, sort of e-learning and that sort of thing, because people just sometimes need an awareness training, don't they? So it's very much we've got a suite, but we feel they are just too rigid. We need to develop them more that tell the story, if you like. I think that's how I'd put it. So we've got them. We bring them to scrutiny. You're very familiar with them, but I think we need to develop others that we can evidence that, if you like, the corporate policy is working. I think that's what we need. We need some, that the leads work. It was the example I was going to give, actually. I sort of withdrew speaking it. I mean, Kim's team went out recently, and I think it's a good example where there was an issue of removing some pets because they weren't being cared for. But the staff were so concerned about the person living in the property that, Kim appropriately contacted me to ensure that we would follow that up, by way of a referral around a vulnerable adult. So, those things do happen, and it's not that we are now the leads. That's the sort of day-to-day business. But in terms of, so I think that is some evidence that it does happen on a day-to-day basis, and we did follow that case up. So, in some ways, very reassuring that the person who went out wasn't just focused on the animals that needed removing. They were thinking, these people are living in squalor, it's bad, they need some assistance, this is not how people should be living. We'll get in touch with social care, can they go out and do something about it? But in terms of the PIs, I suppose what I'm saying, some of it's got to be work that we develop over the next few months.
Any other questions on proposal 3? If not, we move on then to proposal 4, and I think Councillor Crick is going to take us through this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is about, as you know, the council-wide safe recruitment policy. How will a decision on the future of the employee handbook actually impact on safe recruitment? It's not clear from the information we've got whether in fact you've had appendices updated with this over a period of time, or whether it's just been static since 2007, which I think we all find a bit hard to believe.
I think it's fair to say that the employee handbook has not been regularly used and updated for quite some period of time. In fact, I don't think it's the main means of communication that we have with our staff these days. It perhaps seems a little out of touch with the way that we work. And, in my view, I think we need to look at other ways in which we promote the safeguarding message then to our workforce and to others. And, it may be that we look at, further developing our internal websites, our intranet, to use that as the channel for raising awareness generally about safeguarding issues. So although it's there as a decision on the handbook and that needs to be considered, I think already, by virtue of the fact that it hasn't been updated, suggests that it isn't our main means of communication.
It's interesting that that's been pulled out, though, as a problem area, because it almost suggests that perhaps the other aspects of HR haven't been taken into account in the work that was done by the WAO, which is a little bit concerning. What about your whistle-blowing policies as well, and where do they link in?
Yeah. I mean, it's important to note that we already have in place whistleblowing policies which have, recently been updated. The corporate policy has been updated. That's been taken through the Ethics and Standards Committee. I think what this action point is looking at is that currently we have separate policies at present. There is one in place for education. There is the corporate policy, which incorporates social care. And I think what we are looking to do is to see if we can't bring those together and make it one policy. Now, that might be possible. It may not be possible, but I think it's certainly something that we need to look to do, and then to be able to communicate that to the workforce.
Councillor Barnett.
Yes, as a caveat to that, I'm sure most of you are aware that there's a great deal of interest now in the result of whistleblowing policies, because research by trade unions and others have proved that many people who have been whistleblowers and found to have made very wise moves there have found themselves blacklisted and unable to get employment and driven into, some very vulnerable situations themselves. Are we at some time in the future perhaps going to discuss the need with our contractors to find out whether they are aware that we encourage whistleblowing and do not expect people to be blacklisted should they expose successfully, obviously, or alert successfully some danger to vulnerable people? Because the chances are otherwise that people are going to be too scared to whistleblow if they think they could be out of a job for the rest of their lives.
I mean, it's true, isn't it, that this is very much in the spotlight at the moment, and I think we've got, a duty on us to remind our contractors, through contract compliance, etc., of the, of the responsibilities that they have, and, the fact that, there can be no cover-up, really. There's nowhere that the people, people should be given an opportunity to come forward and bring forward any concerns they have in whatever organisation that they work in. And I think, we have a role to promote that at every opportunity. And as I said, it's certainly our intention to review our current arrangements and, refresh those and publicise them so that, we make our staff aware that, there are channels that they can turn to if they have any concerns within our organisation.
Alan?
Sorry. Chair, yes. Does every new employee get an employee handbook?
Every new employee who joins the council has the main policies and procedures brought to their attention. There is no staff handbook in place at the moment. As I said previously, it's been replaced to all intents and purposes by the use of our intranet site, our internal website for staff, and that is where we place all policies, procedures. It's the go-to place really for staff, joining the council. That's where we direct people to get their information. And as I said, the employee handbook is long out of date, and I guess one of the actions we're going to need to consider is whether there is any scope to revive that, or whether we continue with the development of our internal website as the main means of communication.
Mills and then Sean. Sorry.
Yeah, you just stated that all new members of staff are made aware of the policies and procedures that are on the website, etc. But do we have a sort of audit trail to say that those people have actually read and understood the policies? Or do we just say, it's all there, if you need to refer to it, but we don't actually check it?
Whilst we may circulate information to staff, we don't ask them to sign and say that they've received it or acknowledged it. I mean, perhaps within certain service areas there are some key documents, some key policies that they perhaps might want to get staff to do just that and sign and say they've received them. But in general terms, we don't ask staff to say that they've received them and that they've signed them.
So I could just come in there as well. Just in terms of education, I think, I'm not speaking on behalf of the rest of the council, but I suspect the practice is quite variable at the moment. The reality is that head teachers will induct staff in different ways, and it may be that there's a rigorous process around that in terms of ensuring that the members of staff have seen policies and signed for policies, and maybe that it isn't so rigorous. So I think it is important that as part of this work and getting together as the group, that we look at that and issue some guidance around induction and policy and sharing policy information, and where necessary training and alerting staff to things like the whistleblowing policy, and making the environment as safe as possible for them to feel that if there is something they need to alert anyone to, then they're able to do so without worry about any consequences or implications for them. Certainly the whistleblowing policy in schools at the moment is quite old. So as part of the update to the corporate policy, we'll be looking to convert that into a school-friendly version to take account of school-specific circumstances as well. And that'll be worked into the work plan over the next couple of months. Thank you, Chair. The 4.3 and the comments that have been made seem to imply that the general consensus is that we feel that the employee handbook is a bit out of date, is something that is possibly not used that much, or is not really focused on. My my thought process on this is, if we're looking at safeguarding in the way that we say we are, how can we guarantee that every single person that works with our children or with our, adults, has internet access, has the capability to, glean this information without actually producing something, whether it be a handbook or producing an induction course, whatever it may be. We wouldn't do that with health and safety. If you went to work on a building site or whatever, before you can even put a hard hat on, you've got to go on a course. You have no choice. And, you have to understand the policies. You're given a handbook. There's no argument. There's no ifs, no buts. Because if you're not, health and safety will come in and close the site down. There's no grey area, about it at all. And that's my biggest concern, is that by not having something, we're then, possibly laying ourselves open to then creating a grey area, which to me is a big risk.
I mean, I concur with your comments. Clearly, you know, not everybody is online and has access to the internet, and I think it's certainly something that this group has to look at. And, you know, we need to reinforce induction. We need to, you know, make sure that you know, the messages are delivered and received but by all staff who join the council. And, you know, there's various ways in which we can do that. And, you know, it may well be that there is a need to send out information in written format to, you know, some you know, parts of the workforce that you know, are not currently you know, have access to the internet. So, you know, there may always be a place for something in that format. You know, and we need to have regard for that when we consider this.
I mean, really, sorry. You know, it follows on obviously from what was said before. You know, it's that thing of guaranteeing that somebody has access to the information, guaranteeing it. You know, whether it, you know, they've put their thumbprint on a bit of paper to say, yes, I've definitely looked at that and read it and understood it. You know, it's not just a case of putting the information out there. It's a case of, do I understand it?
Thanks, Chair. I think the answer is an electronic handbook, but the point I wanted to make was, given that you've just said not all employees have access to the internet, therefore not all employees will have access to our website, therefore if we're updating policies on that website, a lot of those will have not seen them, even if indeed initially they did see the handbook, which might not be the case. So does that not suggest there are lots of gaps in knowledge out there?
I mean, we can't, you know, remove the importance of managers' responsibilities in all of this, because, you know, as and when there are updates to policies and guidance and whatever, you know, it is the responsibility of the managers to make their staff groups aware of such changes. But I think it's something that we clearly need to consider and look at when we look at this action plan, and you know, really be clear ourselves as to how we intend to communicate with the workforce and make sure that, you know, everybody has access to the same information at the same time. So, you know, we're going to have to look at that very closely.
Yeah, just a quick one. It's another aspect of that question, and when information is available from two sources, one of which is out of date and the other of which has superseded it, it really is important that that people are clearly aware, do not bother with that. I mean, are we in a situation where the handbook still contains information that's relevant, but other information that is equally relevant is somewhere else now, and we've just not sorted out that staff are clear as to where they go, when they go, what they go for, because that is a huge gap and a huge risk.
I certainly think there's more that we can and should be doing to, you know, make staff aware of where they can get up-to-date, you know, information. You know, in my experience, the employee handbook hasn't been used or in place for a considerable number of years, you know. So, you know, I think it's fair to say that isn't the main means of communication with our workforce, and hasn't been for some time. I mean, it may be that some service areas have their own form of, you know, of information, but not on a corporate basis. But I do think, you know, we need to consider very carefully how and where we direct staff to go for their main information, where they can find information, where they can, you know, find the policies and procedures that we are referring to, and you know, get their, you know, raise their awareness of things. So I think we do have some, you know, there's some further work that we can do in that regard.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but I'm still not clear from what you're saying. A, does everyone have an induction when they're employed? Is this topic covered in that induction? Then, having been employed, are they having either cascaded or regular training in safeguarding, and how are you monitoring that? Do you have records which indicate which staff have had this training and which staff haven't? And how do you then proceed to fill the gaps?
In terms of induction, we rely quite heavily on service areas arranging and carrying out their own inductions for new staff that join their respective areas. That is a managerial responsibility, and I'm aware that does and is going on in different parts of the service. I can certainly say within the service area that that I have most dealings with, which is social care, that there is that activity going on. I think there is some work that we need to be doing on the corporate front. There has been corporate induction in the past. I think that is currently being looked at and refreshed, and I think that that will need to run hand in hand with any induction that member staff gets at the the service area level, so that the two complement one another. In terms of training, safeguarding, POVA training, I think in some service areas there is a training needs analysis activity that is carried out. That certainly happens in social care. And there is safeguarding training that is provided and is available across the council, which service areas can, avail themselves of. And, a lot of our staff have already gone through that training and refresher training as part of their, ongoing awareness and development. So, there are regular exercises to understand the training needs of the workforce. And, I think there is still further work to do on that. But we are currently developing safeguarding training. Even as we speak, we've recently developed some e-learning training on POVA, for example. So, we are constantly looking for ways to improve and make available this type of training for the workforce.
Councillor Mills in, and then Councillor Kemp.
Sorry, yeah. Those of us that are school governors, safeguarding training is mandatory for all of us. Is it not a case then that perhaps safeguarding training should be mandatory for all staff?
Sorry, if I just clarify on the first point, that the safeguarding training is mandatory for chairs of governors and the designated safeguarding governor, and we recommend that all members of the governing body do undergo safeguarding training. In terms of the training records in education, it's the responsibility for of the head teacher to ensure that all of the staff are appropriately trained at level 1, level 2, and then subsequently on beyond that. And those training records would be kept at a school level. We've just put together some training now for governors and for designated safeguarding officers. That'll be run over February and March, and actually Social Care provided some designated safeguarding training for head teachers quite recently. So there's a rolling programme of training in place. Certainly in terms of the record keeping part of it, that is done at the school end, and we are looking to develop a mechanism whereby the local authority can hold that record as well, so that we can go back and check with schools that all people have received the level of the level of training they need, and that is refreshed at regular intervals. I'm sorry, Tracy.
Thank you. I'm just considering whether the policies for safeguarding differ from authority to authority, whether the training differ from authority to authority. But the fact that we're doing more joined up thinking, especially when it comes to the EAS, and we know that there's cross-border, if you like, training, and I'm just thinking whether or not there's been any thoughts in regarding doing any safeguarding from a social services point of view for Pan Gwent, if you like, in order to save not only money but again to strengthen the importance of safeguarding and the fact that staff members can, if like do a certain amount of talking to colleagues from other parts of the, I'm still going to call it Gwent or the nearby local authorities. Just a thought.
For some years, even before we were in a regional safeguarding board, we did have a regional safeguarding training group, and that still runs. So all of the training that comes out of the South East Wales Safeguarding Children Board is done on a regional basis. And what that does, as well as makes best use of resources, it means that we've got a rolling programme that is running much more regularly because it's running across the 5 local authorities, so that if you missed one, you can pick up one in another area. It means you may have to go to Newport or Caerphilly, or someone from there might have to come to Torfaen, but it means we've got that much more sort of regular training. So that's an ongoing thing that happened before we were in a regional safeguarding arrangement. It happens now. In terms of a specific training, for example, in education, I don't think there was much in the way of collaboration between the different education authorities across the region, but I think again now, as you say, now with the EAS, now with a more sort of collaborative working, I think that has started, Darren, now, hasn't it, to share?
Yeah, we previously had a safeguarding training officer in the education service who left quite recently, so we've procured in some training for head teachers and chairs of governance just currently. What we want to do is work with the South East Wales, the Regional Safeguarding Board's training group to try and get to that position whereby there's available training through the SUSCEB. And yeah, if there are benefits in terms of economies of scale and obviously the multi-agency aspect of the training, then let's access that as well.
Feedback from participants is always really good when there's a multi-agency sort of delivery mechanism. So it's not just one professional, type delivering to the group. You've got a range of professionals, and it just enriches the training, and it's a much more sort of experiential sort of learning environment. And it's always, it does go down very well with people.
Are the policies basically the same from one authority to another?
Basically, but they wouldn't be exactly.
Councillor Barnett, sorry.
Yes, thank you. To extend that question a little further, and I better declare an interest as Vice Chair of TOGS and a trustee of CMIG, how satisfied are you that organisations, charity organisations in particular, that provide support to vulnerable people of any age are fully aware of their safeguarding responsibilities, and what help can you offer should they need training for volunteers and staff?
It's that difficult question to say that we can't be certain, but we can certainly be inclusive, which we are, and training across the sector, it's open to everybody, so they can access training, safeguarding in terms of vulnerable adults and child protection. In terms of offering them help, we would always look to help and support people, and if any organisation contacts us, we would do our best, via the safeguarding unit to help them, point them in the right direction, by the safeguarding manager actually attending a meeting, or even running individual training sessions for small staff groups, which she has done and is perfectly, willing to do, if that's a good way of engaging groups of staff. But in terms of, there's very much a reliance on other organisations coming forward. We can make raise awareness. As I say, we've got the Learning and Review subgroup, which is the sort of multi-agency subgroup of which there are lots of smaller organisations a part of that. You're very much reliant on engaging them and drawing them in. But we have been doing that, and we've done that quite successfully. And in fact now we've actually got some of those groups being part of Train the Trainer, so that they can go out and work alongside other professionals, which I think is a real step forward. But it's one of those tasks that doesn't end. It's ongoing. You've got to keep doing it as people move on.
Okay, can we move on then to proposal 5? And I think Ron is going to take us through this one.
Yeah, I was going to, thanks Chair, I was going to look at three areas, but I think one of them has in fact already been looked at, and that's the question of being sure that people receive the training that they need. And there has to be some sort of management system to do that, whether it's mandatory or not, something. But the two other areas are about the identification of needs via self-assessment and then the delivery of the training. To be effective, from my experience, and again it's the educational background as a governor, self-evaluation has to be highly structured against specific responsibilities. So we need to be really clear what is it we're seeking to train people for. So it has to be structured, well prepared. And what I've noticed is that in the plan, both of that self-evaluation and the implementation of the training is down for December. Do you think that's actually a very realistic timescale, that you're going to do all of that identification, development of courses and delivery of courses in the month of December, where round about the 20-something, if I remember rightly, people tend to disappear?
I think it was the date was by which we would hope to have done the bulk of it, as opposed to doing everything in December.
I think that would be useful to make clear in the plan that these are timescales, they're either end dates or between, yeah.
Any other questions on proposal 5?
Sorry, if I could just come in terms of the self-assessment part as well. I think we'd all agree that obviously there is a role for self-assessment in it, but we need to stipulate as well as part of our policy that there's mandatory levels of training that are required for certain individuals, and we've already got that in the pyramid of different levels of training that are required for different roles within social care, education, or any of the other departments.
Any other questions on proposal 5? If not, we move on then to proposal 6 and Jeffries.
This is for Peter, really. Can you tell us a little bit about the audit method that you will employ once the operation of the revised safeguarding policies are approved and implemented?
We started from basic, really. We start from that because it'd be a new policy. We go through the policy, identify what we think are the key controls in that policy, and we just test that those controls are operating throughout the council across the ground. So it'll be a start from scratch approach, and that will also be supplemented by the existing DBS checks, which we carry out as part of the safe recruitment policy across the council anyway.
And how long would the actual process take?
The audit itself. It shouldn't take that long, to be honest. Once the policy's there, it's a matter of identifying which test to do it and do it. And same as any other audit, and it depends how quickly people get the information to us. So I wouldn't envisage it being a long process, and a report should be available after that then in terms of findings.
So we're looking at now for it to be completed sometime in 2016. If for any reason you're asked to complete it sooner than that, would there be any sort of capacity issues within the current internal audit programme that would stop that happening?
There's always capacity issues within the current internal audit programme, but I think it's about need then and risk. And if it's deemed important that an audit is carried out, well, things will I move things around and change other audits to accommodate the request. So, I wouldn't envisage that being a problem if it was needed.
You commented earlier about the data barring criteria. Can you just comment on that a little bit more, whether it be included in the safeguarding policy?
I think I may have got a typo there. I think it's actually the disclosure and barring system. We always just refer to it as DBS. I'm still in CRB territory, to be honest. They were a bit of old money, but basically the tests we carry out are mainly on new recruits within the council to make sure they have we've carried out the appropriate DBS checks in terms of past history of people, past employment history, gaps in employment, and made sure we satisfied ourselves that the people we recruit are appropriate to the post they take. Obviously, not all posts in the council require a DBS check. That's been transformed over the last year or so. I think it's gone from a lot of people having DBS checks to not as many now. And I think in the past, for example, I can speak as audit as an example. All staff in internal audit previously been subject to DBS checks because we could have had access to records within social care. It's now deemed that access to that record is not necessarily needing a DBS check. So all my staff no longer require a DBS check. So we will check it when people are recruited. Within the HR system, it dictates whether that person is subject to a check, and we are checking whether that's been taking place. If it hasn't been taking place as an appropriate risk assessment, then pending the receipt of the DBS. And, are they potentially putting people at risk by employing them? And that's down to the managers then in terms of the process. But we check that process is in place for mainly new recruits.
Okay, any other questions on Proposal 6?
Just a really quick one on the question of allocation of resources. Obviously, as I said earlier, this is seen as a very serious matter now. Does the council run a sort of register of key risks, which it will then use to decide where the resources of internal audit are best put over a particular period?
When I draw up the audit plan, I do take account of risks within the risk register. So, yeah, it would take account of those.
Okay, any other questions for Proposal 6? Can I thank all the chief officers for attending this afternoon? Members will now sort of formulate their recommendations. Thank you all very much. I'm going to hand over now to Helen, who has been making some notes, and perhaps she can guide us through some issues.
Okay, members, listening to your debate, I've written down some notes, some bullet points mainly. Firstly, you had some concerns, or there was some concerns raised about timeliness of actions within the action plan. Would anyone like to comment on that?
Any comments or concerns?
Sorry, yeah.
I think we would like the pace perhaps to be quickened a bit.
Sure. Going back to what Ruth said, she said the dates in the action plan, it would be nice if we could have things done by then. I think we should be a bit more specific, saying things must be done by certain dates, not just we hope they will
Members
be
are concerned about the pace, really, and we need to speed things up.
I think we should be too specific. I think Ron made the point that it was unclear. That was conceded. I think we ought to simply say that they should review the timescales with a view to take into account what Grant Thornton has said and the questions raised during the meeting about getting on with it and whether some of the timescales were realistic in terms of, all staff being trained by December 15. Well, ain't going to happen, is it?
Okay, there was also point made about clarification of the action plan. Would you like to recommend that the action plan is written in clear English, clearly saying who is accountable and appropriate timescales?
I think we'd all agree on that. Yeah.
Yeah, just the thing about them, as well as timescales and accountability and so on, I think also the action plan, we should be asking for identification of key deliverables, not just activities.
Yes.
Yeah.
On performance indicators, it was suggested that performance indicators should also include outcomes as well.
Just add, I don't know where really, but the question about who is responsible at political level, I think what they did clarify in the end, that there is a single member who has overall responsibility, the executive member for social care. Not arguing with that, but that needs to be made clear, I think, in the action plan by actually identifying that post. And likewise, if the report, which they agreed, I think, in the end, would go to Cabinet, not just to executive members. And I think that's important because we get to see that as a full council and can comment on it at council. I think the other question was, should that report come to scrutiny prior to it going to Cabinet? And I think in the normal course of events I would say yes, but we can't have it both ways. We can't complain about the timescale and then delay the report going to Cabinet. But as long as we've got opportunity to discuss it, we can do it at the political group. Other members can do likewise in their groups. I think, though, the sooner that report is available for members to see, so much the better.
I think we could ask if it could go to scrutiny, if it, time allows it. If not, well, it goes on.
Well, when's our next meeting? We're not talking for a couple of months at least, are we? So, and then after the scrutiny meeting, there would be at least 6 weeks, I would have thought, before it could get into Cabinet. And if we're looking for it to get into Cabinet fairly quickly, then simply by insisting it go to scrutiny beforehand, we're probably adding 2 to 3 months to the timescale.
Okay, I have all those.
Are there any other?
Sorry about that. Can I just clarify, are we talking here about the report that is going initially, or are we talking about that and then the quarterly standing reports, which will go not just to executive members but to Cabinet?
Report. The main report we're talking about, yeah.
I also have recommendation around staff induction is reviewed for consistency across the council, both in terms of content and monitoring for effectiveness, and this to be added to the action plan.
Could we add on that as well, that maybe we should have some evidence that staff have seen and understood the policies? They've received them, understood them, and signed for them, really, that they've, on about, on health and safety that they should...
Sorry, if I can when we got onto the staff handbook, we actually opened a huge can of worms there, didn't we? I personally would like to put the proposal that all line managers are responsible to ensure that all their staff read and understand the safeguarding policy. I don't know if that's...
All agree with that, the wording? Yeah.
Yeah, in an ideal world, but I think we've just got to be a little bit careful about placing unrealistic expectations. It's a bit like when you sign up something on the internet that you've read the terms and conditions. I tend to do that without reading the terms and conditions, frankly, because it's hard work. yeah, take a risk. But clearly, this is a much more serious subject than me going on holiday or whatever. So, but I think the sentiment should be expressed, but I don't think it should be expressed in such a way that it becomes too great a burden that it would be regarded as counterproductive as far as those individuals and their managers trying to achieve the impossible. There are lots of people in schools who have a responsibility for reporting on anything relating to children which they are concerned about. You'd expect teachers and you'd expect classroom staff to be properly aware. Whether you would extend that in full to all other sort of ancillary staff within schools with the same degree of urgency, I'm not sure. Especially given that there's probably greater turnover amongst many of those staff. So I just think we need to soften the wording a little bit so as to not make it unrealistic.
Cameron, sorry.
Well, really, we're talking about what I'm thinking. All employees must go through some sort of recruitment process and be put on the payroll. So is there any way something could be incorporated into that to say, even if it's a few main points have been actually pointed out to them?
Just got a last comment there, that staff information to be reviewed in terms of usability and location, and service area information needs to be consistent across the council and complement corporate information.
Mr. Crick?
I think just to add to this discussion, most of these documents aren't terribly lengthy, like the ones we have to sign on the internet, invariably. And it is within a reasonable time expectancy that we would anticipate this would be carried out. The same goes for the whistleblowing, which I think it's important that all members of staff should be aware of.
This may be repeating in one sense what others have said, but taking Brian's or Councillor Morby, I don't know the protocols in this room, comments, I would be personally inclined to be quite hard and tough on the point that was raised by the audit officer and say the current situation regarding the staff handbook and where members of staff find their terms, conditions and responsibilities is simply unacceptable. It's liable to lead to huge risk, and that situation has to be remedied. And just leave it to them to decide how.
Does everybody agree with that?
Okay. Are there any other recommendations that you wish to make on the action plan?
Do we think it's suitable?
So, do you think it's suitable, the action plan going forward? I think we would like to perhaps speed it up a little bit, the pace.
So are you happy that the action plan is suitable, subject to our recommendations?
It's a beginning, but the thing is that we want to see is sometimes the action plans can just be good intentions. We want to see the actual results of all the work.
Thank you very much, members. Thank you for your comments and your questions. Thanks very much.